pass. And I was like, but if you've been getting married all along, why you don't know how much you need?
I know, she asked me that before, I said, what you need to do is go on your website, download that, right there. I said, I'm not your babysitter, sit there. If I read it, you would read it too.
I
am not the guy, don't come back. Babysit nobody.
The reason I don't
I was like, well,
I think you think I love being in here.
But my thing is, if you get all marital file, why you want to know how much you need to pass?
exactly.
That's the one who like always in shambles.
Look like a life of
Like every time you see her, it look like the world about to end.
No, I thought she just be doing
Oh, that's it.
She asked me, I said, what you need to do, sleep, come to class. End of story. I don't work, I'm busy. Come to class, right?
Oh, I'm not the man. You know, sometimes you also get to go hold some papers to make my bind.
The other girl, one girl called me. and she
You need that too?
Because
You need that too?
I know they just in the book, right?
All I see is she bought it up. She has one knapsack just like this yellow one you are. Obviously, she keep pulling papers out, hole punching, staying them and going to print, coming back. Excess. She come to class. She been in class once this year.
She hasn't been from since GRC
You were
started.
in. She the best, but y'all coming up in April.
Ask Brian. Brian, you give up my number.
Huh?
I was going to offer
Uh-uh.
calls for help.
I don't give a people number unless they tell me to do that. And when they ask, you not son? I say, no, you don't have to call somebody else. No, I don't do that. You don't gotta worry about that. And I don't go volunteering people services for people, I don't do that. You need to go check with them and see if they can help you.
Listen, she is killing me. Every time I see her, it's a better thing. You always look devastated. Get your life together.
Risk, tight.
I know it. I got you.
And I know Brian knows all about it
Of course.
because he was working on one
That one,
2 weeks ago, Brian.
let me
See how
tell
your
you
business
something.
has come out?
I know all about that. I'm still leery about that.
Why you worry about it?
Huh?
Why you worry about it?
It's kinda iffy. I'm lost with that.
What?
I'm like my phone, I'm not taking anything class today with doctor, cause
This is she's trouble. All right, let's appetite. She asked last week what we gonna do.
Who?
You.
But I hear though, I have been here every Wednesday, except one, since the year
okay,
started.
thank you.
Better than some.
She went to strip on the wall.
Just show it off.
Now, when you answer your assignment, the last paragraph says, this report should include a brief summary of your findings and explain why these findings represent a risk. Okay. So the key word there is a risk. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna be looking at what's the risk in the scenario. So before we do the risk assessment, we're gonna look at what is the risk appetite of IO. So who wants to start? Come on, y'all left last week in eagerness
Eagerness for what?
to write the paper.
To run and finish?
I dropped my name.
Risk appetite. How do we go about determining what is the risk appetite of IO or any firm?
Okay,
Go ahead.
that's to do with like,
I mean, but I don't see it in the question
Yeah.
to say. However, I mean, when you wanna determine the risk appetite of the firm, you just look at the type of clients they take on, the
Products and
credit,
services.
products, yeah, any credit,
Right, exactly.
yeah.
But from it, you should be able to determine what's their risk appetite.
Ow.
What do you mean how? What do you mean?
I need to like look at the question, I can't really tell.
So that's based on geographical region, where exactly,
Doesn't matter.
it doesn't know, so then you have to do something like that.
We have to
There
close the
is-
board and see you want.
You know what?
That,
Close the board and see you want.
so then their risk appetite is going to be,
Okay, go to page 221 at the very top. The questions you should ask yourself. The board takes the lead in risk appetite. There are 5 questions they need to consider from a board level. Because you're giving the report to whom? The board. Okay. So, what are the significant risks the board is willing to take or not willing to take? Okay. So reading from the tone and scenario, are they willing to take this risk?
No.
No. What are the strategic objectives of the organization? Yes.
Customer confidentiality.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is the board clear about the nature and extent of the significant risks it is willing to take in achieving its objectives? Because remember now, your response to these questions will weave into your recommendation as to whether or not the bank's risk appetite needs to be revisited. And if you say it needs to be revisited, then you need to say what's missing. This one you say?
Child.
Does the board need to establish clearer governance over risk appetite and tolerance of the organization? Yes? No? It does. Because when you read the paragraph where they say they instituted all those new gadgets, there are no policies and procedures in place.
that's really right, definitely.
What steps has the board taken to ensure oversight over the management of the risk? They're just doing it right now. So it says, if you go down to the last bullet point on that same page, they say the appetite must be part of the control culture within the business. So when you speak about the culture of the organization, you have to speak about the organization risk appetite. You went to sleep, I saw you.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. So. So what would you say with regard to your risk appetite in this question? What's your recommendation? Do they need to have an actual or revisit their risk appetite? Setting the tone from the top. Why every time I come in here this thing rings and I can't find it? A risk appetite framework has some key elements that has to be visible. Strategy, organization, behavior, tools, and methods. And depends on how you write. You can say one way of addressing whether or not you're meeting your risk appetite is you can stress test it. Good night. Okay. So let's look at our scenario again. It says, brief summary of your findings and explain why these findings represent a risk. So who did a summary of the findings?
I did it on my mobile phone.
Read it.
What is that? Isn't that a mobile phone right there? Oh, it's
So she wants you to read it.
She should go first since she has a hard
She
copy.
didn't speak it. She
You love your
You
summary?
mean the columns you made?
Everybody else theirs. I'm not gonna write them on the board.
What? What?
Oh, it's one of those.
on the side.
Go sit here.
What you want me to?
No, I don't want you to read it. I want you to look at your key. Look at your findings.
Okay.
So everybody has their findings in front of them? You have homework to do, you know. You have your findings. Yes?
Why you looking at me? Because she looking at you.
I love it so much.
Okay, so what did you do after you summarized your findings? Tell me what you did. What did you do?
I, after the findings, I looked at what type of risk they are. Operational risk and.
Exactly. So, how did you come up with that determination? Let me ask so.
Based on the findings.
Or I'm missing a step. What step are you missing, Brian?
Assess.
Yes, you have to go through the whole risk process. Because it has to make sense. So, let's start. Take the very first issue that you have. The very first one. And then you're gonna run it through a risk process. So the first thing you did was you identified the risk, correct? What's the second step? You assess it. Did you assess the risk? I ain't hearing nothing. You have to assess it. Did you assess it?
I jumped to.
No. Yeah, you jump straight to recommendation, right?
Yeah.
No, you can't jump to recommendation. You have to assess the risk. Remember now, this question, when you read it in entirety, it involves all elements of the course. This one is the tone from the top, the risk appetite. This one here is going through the whole risk process. And this one here is having the policies and procedures in place for staff to comply. I see people typing.
Well, you went first, didn't you?
I hear typing. Okay, so take the first one, whatever it is you summarized. summary number 1. I want you, then what is the risk identification? Based upon what you have pulled out. You got it? Yes? No? Brian?
Your favorite.
So for example, Ms. Archer,
Mm-hmm.
the first problem in this question was like minor incidents near misses
Mm-hmm.
relating to data protection confidentiality. That's the first problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll say, would the risk offer that?
Okay,
Problem.
you've already identified it,
Right.
because it's in the question.
Okay,
So now you go to step 2.
okay.
You need a description.
So, we would have said that the problems were already identified. We would need to rehash those in the, because I also have here where you said to, I need to summarize the findings by identifying the risk.
Mhm.
Is that for our purposes only, or is that for also the paper?
Depends how you write it.
On the paper, for her question, it says here that, the report should include a brief summary of the findings.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you can say, what you.
Say what, say,
And briefly though.
Briefly.
What, in the paper.
because they want more, what is the risk?
Okay,
And how you gonna mitigate against the risk,
Right.
how you gonna monitor it
okay,
after you put the measures in place.
okay.
And that's all a part of the risk management process. So then you have to give a description of the risk. What do you think you should be putting there?
Types of risks, types of risks.
But the type of risk that relates to
The problem.
the problem that you have identified for each one of them.
So that'll be just the basic risk, like the legal risk or compliance
Compliance risk,
risk.
yes. So here you put the name, the scope. You getting this now, right? The nature. I don't want you all to think that you have all of these months and it's that easy.
All these months.
We don't know.
You had many months.
You miss the last word, you just write the last word, you can say what the word was.
Oh, because nobody can see that, it's like statistics.
That does not.
That'd be a briefcase you draw it.
So can you do that so far for your first issue? Yeah?
I can't even see that board.
What? What you
I
can't
can't even
see?
see the board. Risks.
I don't know why the light off.
Risk, scope, nature, and stakeholders.
That's the medium.
Names.
Oh, risk, no, risk description. That's what you guys see? It's supposed to be description with that scope.
Is it
What the thing with
risk?
description?
Yes. They must have cut that off by mistake.
Miss
We
Archie,
got
that's
that?
description or disrupt?
Where? This? Description.
Yeah.
Supposed to be adopted in that, like they.
No, everybody keeps saying that why.
A question, could we put like business impact somewhere in there? Put a
Later.
description later? Okay.
Later.
Yeah, that's what you
Yeah,
need.
yeah.
And quantification of risk. It sounding familiar?
When you say quantification, what do you mean? High, medium, low, that sort of thing, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you speak here, that's when you do the no.
Jesus.
That's what this ties into. Who's sucking a teeth? Why?
question, stressful.
But the last thing is a risk. Last one.
Tolerance.
So you're pretty much doing a mix, somewhat of a matrix.
Yeah, for each issue. For each one. That's the only way at the end of the day, when you write your recommendation, it will make sense. Otherwise, you just be randomly just talking about anything. And it won't be focused on the issues that's in the scenario. It's a logical process. You got me? You can see the light now, right?
No.
Oh. Why?
So this is
If you did it by just taking the issues and giving a recommendation,
You missed some steps.
you miss some steps. And your recommendation may not make sense based on the issue. Because when you write your recommendation at the end of the day, based on each one of these issues and the risk identified, you have to prioritize it. You can only prioritize it by going through this process. So the first three, you do each one of those separately. In the scenario, the first three, they have to be done separately.
What first three?
Risks.
The first three issues.
The first
Identify
three
the risk.
issues, you've identified the risk in each one of those.
Yeah.
How much issues are there?
Oh Lord, everybody have their own, I know how many you have.
You saying the first three?
When she read it off, she said three, going on the summary that they gave.
I only got three.
So we
Oh,
can.
But you say first three, I feel like I missed
Some
something.
people may have more.
Oh, I feel like I was messing up.
Yeah.
But let's do, if I have more than three, do risk for each one.
Yes. So when you make your recommendation and you've already prioritized it, you know whether or not you're amalgamating it or this is not material.
Okay.
Because then you may find that one of the risks ties into another risk, or this risk may be very important because it should have been something that the board should have focused on first. Because remember now, when you write to the board, you need to tell the board what you want them to do. And then the rest is what the board would delegate to senior management. And it has to be clear.
So if I could just, a specific issue I can see is probably the employees incorrectly storing client data, right? That's what I identified so much of this wrong. But with that particular issue, I could utilize your matrix and say, okay, the risk name is employee incorrectly storing data. The scope of it, whether it's, when you say, whether it's scope would not be, I'm trying to talk it through in my head.
Go
Let me
ahead,
know if I'm
yeah,
wrong.
go ahead.
So once again, the issue that I identify is employees incorrectly storing customer data.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name. The
Mm-hmm.
scope would be, and I'm confusing probably scope
Go ahead.
and quantification, because when I think of scope, I think if it's a high risk or if it's wide ranging or.
Wide ranging.
Okay, so so the scope or the nature of it would be a
Mhm.
wide ranging scope, because this could be really detrimental for customers depending on where they're located. The nature of it, I'm not sure what you mean by the nature of it. How would you explain the nature of that particular issue when you say issue? I think the stakeholders would be employees.
No,
or
what's the
customers.
nature of it?
That's why I don't, that one doesn't compute with me in terms of the matrix that I wanna follow.
The nature of it depends on what area it impacts. Right. Is it operational? Is it financial? What happened?
This harder than the first paper.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not gonna
Because you're
say-
getting, as you get deeper into it, then
The
you
first
begin to
one
see.
was hard. So this real hard. The third one be killing.
And you have the third one?
I wanna look at that.
Just to finish with that particular question, the stakeholders would be whether it's the customers or the employees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, well, I would say that what is high risk, or the risk would be, the quantification would be high risk.
Yeah, but how you arrive at that
Well, I mean,
in your risk estimation?
oh, this is, because they're saying.
This goes over here.
They said a okay.
One is probability and one is damage.
Exactly, based on the test.
And one is damage. So you have to put your assumptions. What is this? What? What? You were asking me something? Yes, you did. Tolerance, appetite.
Ms. Archer.
Yeah.
What did you say about scope again, please?
Why? The range, arranging.
Risk what? Treatment?
And control. What's currently in place now? This is what's currently in place. You see how when you do this, you're able in your mind to write a recommendation? Okay, let me leave her alone.
Talk, I listen, share.
I listen.
Action for improvement. You see how you isolating each issue and methodically going through this process. So this is the same way how you do it on the job. They say there is a problem. In your mind, you have to go through the step and see whether or not there's an actual risk. Estimate if it's going to cost the financial institution any damage based on the severity of it. And then your recommendation. Because this is what determines whether or not you put this in your compliance report. After you've identified and assessed the risk, look at the existing controls, then you decide whether or not this is material enough to be in your compliance report. What? What's currently in place? Yeah. Action for improvement. And then the strategy, operational improvement. Who's going to be responsible for making the changes? Developing the policies and procedures. Here.
So, based on this risk, based on this matrix, you're saying that if we could identify how many other issues, if there are 3 or more, and we follow this
For each one.
matrix, we'll be able to get close to these 100 marks. Is that something that we could put in our heads to go? That would be the question, that would be the answer.
Yeah, but when you write your answer, you're not writing this table.
Of course.
Yeah.
But this is something that we can go home with. and
In your
say,
head, right, each one.
Okay, and that would be at least close to it.
So based on what I gave you last week, that's where you would have started. Now, this week, you're gonna looking at doing the whole risk assessment process. So when I come next week, you all should have your first draft.
What?
Yes?
So I have a question. So, okay, we're supposed to do this whole process, right? So my question is, how do you tie in all the research and reading that you have to do, like the acts and all that stuff you have to look up, into this whole process to write the report?
What actually?
But I mean like the data protection act and like all those things.
When you say
Are
that,
you,
what
are
you
you
mean?
putting that information in your recommendation part or in the whole assessment part or what, where?
When you assess your risk,
When you assess your risk.
you need to know which one violation are.
You
So
identify
after
the
the-
risk,
so-
when you identify, what's, better question?
Right here.
It says, who was responsible for action from improvement?
There's the one, okay, here. You remember for Project Team, recently formed to develop approach to data protection and confidentiality. Okay, so what's the risk there?
Leaking, crime.
A breach,
information,
a breach of data protection and a breach of confidentiality.
Right,
So in the Bahamas, we have two pieces of legislation.
right. we
What's the
went over those
penalty?
last week.
The penalty will be here. When you do this, there's a fine. And it depends on the level of the breach. Red is minor, serious, or very serious. And the regulator have an administrative penalties at the back,
Yeah.
the ranges. So you'll know, based upon that, what the regulator sees as a breach of section 19. It's right there.
And that's the data protection act section.
No, that's right, that's what some of those regulations are. Then you go to data protection, and you see what a financial institution or any institution will be fined if there is a breach. And they'll tell you the scope of what is a breach. So you see why it's important when you do your scope based upon what's in the scenario, you should know whether or not that ties into what the law says is a breach. Sounding better?
Yeah,
Getting there?
yeah, y'all tell me thank you for asking the question.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Bill.
Oh, girl. What is this? Well, the next one is July the 15th, and you have
Why are we talking about that right now?
4 questions.
Why you-
You asked it, was
No, I asked that.
You have 4 questions. You're on your own then.
No, because you coming back to visit us, hey,
Mm-mm. Not before then.
Stephen, hey.
Very end though.
Stephen's giving it a mother.
So this is this table. Looking at the financial and the probability. Now you know this is where the examiner is looking for your thought process. You have to evaluate the risk. And when we say evaluate it, what are we talking about?
I guess whether the institution is able to manage it or.
Mhm. Right, accept or not? How are you gonna mitigate against it? And here you focus on the risk appetite. Mm-hmm.
I see one, okay. So what I'm seeing on the board then is that number 5 now step process. And within each of these steps, there are multiple steps in each of those. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And last one is the risk treatment.
It's a long process for each.
How long you had this?
No, I'm not saying,
Oh.
I'm just saying it's a long,
Maybe
methodical
just really the
process.
5-step
It's only 5 steps.
risk process. Risk assessment process.
And so what's the risk treatment?
Use your recommendation.
Your recommendations. for each one. You see how it makes sense now?
Yes.
So you would have jumped from the issue, from up here, you went straight here.
Yeah, we better get those points.
No,
We skipped the whole.
because you skipped this whole process.
Yeah, no, we don't have one.
Like I just skipped the whole.
I was already looking at the
I was like, once it one five.
Yeah, that's all I was doing.
I missed two.
So it's risk, who taking pictures again? Risk, control, mitigation, tolerance. All I wanna get is this mumbling.
Hold on, oh, this is part of step 5?
Yes?
Oh, okay.
Let me not put tolerance, I don't like that. And you notice I put in these words because they're looking for these words. These are the words that you use in GRC. When you speak in your recommendation, whatever you recommend.
This should be the last class, eh?
And this focus and this is tied into this. What happened?
The middle one, risk.
Avoidance. You said this should be the last class?
No, ma'am, no.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
That'll be on more tables like this.
Don't be, what kind of information? It's not, just to beat these things very swiftly.
Yes, I did.
I'm gonna say risk acceptance.
Risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk control, and mitigation. Mm-hmm. Then you have to tell them how you're gonna monitor it. Yes, recommendation doesn't stop. Nope. And then you review it.
Review it,
When you give a recommendation, say my recommendation says that the best thing to do with this in the future is to fold this up and put it in 4 squares and then rest it over here. So that's your recommendation. The next question is, how do you monitor that? How do you make sure that the staff is doing
What they supposed to do.
what you said
Fold it
to
in
be
form,
done?
put it in a corner.
So then you do what you're gonna do, stress test and journal on it.
Whatever it is for the risk, each one. And then the next part is review. When are you going to review this process? How often? Yes.
So run the paper again. No. There's a lot of these, them little words they's gonna give you.
Don't forget now, the bulk of what you're going to write is gonna be in here. And the information for this will come from this. I'm just trying to show you how when you take all of that information there, focus it and channel it right, so that when you write your recommendation and you wrap around it your evaluation of the risk, and then how you're gonna mitigate against that risk going forward, that it makes sense. That's all this question is about, risk management process.
What review is about again?
How you gonna monitor, how you, process, review the
Looking at
process?
review the process. If you put the process in place today, you gotta review it every 6 months, 3 months. And then you're gonna add that into your report to the board. You make a determination whether or not you're putting this as an item that's outstanding in your compliance report to the board. Remember, you have to stress the role of senior management. Senior management role is a part of monitoring. people have to be accountable. So in this whole process in writing this, you have to, the question is not focused on this, but you have to mention culture. Whenever people don't adhere to policies and procedures, there's a culture issue. Culture issue starts from the tone from the top. If you issue new products, new services, new tools for staff, and you don't have policies and procedures in place, it means that from a risk perspective, a risk assessment was not conducted on those things before they were introduced to staff. And when you introduce them, you do a risk assessment, and you must have policies and procedures. And those policies and procedures must be approved by the board.
You wanna start?
Yeah.
There's actually the point on monitoring. I missed what you had indicated about monitoring, about how do we monitor, what do you mean?
Monitoring is looking at the frequency. Are you going to be checking this? You're gonna be doing quarterly reviews? Are you gonna have a daily report? What are you going to do? Now it's getting clearer? Hmm? Yes? No?
Maybe so.
I can take it off?
No.
Even though the picture be beautiful with you in it.
Suck up, such a teacher's pet.
Okay.
Smile, you're on camera.
Oh, she give you the notes, yeah? Some friendly friends. You're my friend.
I didn't get an okay that I'm gonna get the first draft.
When is?
On next Wednesday.
Yes?
In class, or email.
Anyone?
I mean, you better come to class next week.
He didn't say he was not coming.
I won't be here next
Why
week
you
because
not
I'll be out of town for work. Do we have another one? Or I can
Email it.
Okay.
She ain't coming to class.
When I call you, when I call your name and you're not here, then I remember. Okay? All right. So now, let's discuss the risk.
Amen.
How are you gonna categorize the risk?
Legal, regulatory, compliance risk,
You have financial,
reputational, no? What do you want reputation? You want to do that?
And threat.
Compliance. Legal.
so looking at your issues, where do they fall?
Regulatory, reputational, financial, and reputational, and compliance,
Enterprise too?
possibly legal.
Where would you have a legal risk, based on your issues?
I mean, okay, let's say hypothetically speaking,
Yeah, it has to be hypothetical. Why it has to be hypothetical?
because it hasn't really, right, it wasn't a breach, there were never.
And you have not even done your risk assessment yet to determine whether or not that risk exists.
Oh, so don't even.
You jump into conclusion.
I mean.
Would you say they mean? You haven't gone through the process to identify what is the actual risk.
Wow.
So you can't say
No,
if
you
the
have,
breaches actually did occur.
exactly. Or the probability of it. And the estimation based upon if there is a breach. What is the damage? So we know if it's confidentiality, we'll have a financial risk, correct?
Yeah.
What other risk would we have?
Regulatory. Because aren't you supposed to have certain systems in place to prevent that from even happening? In terms of the data protection part.
Dan, reputational risk.
Mm-mm.
Reputational risk for fraud.
You'll have a reputational risk. They go together.
Exactly.
Put them together. Is it an enterprise-wide risk? Is it?
No.
Enterprise-wide means that it covers the whole organization. Okay.
All levels of management, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the ones that actually exist.
Mm-hmm. It says in the same sentence after it said this report should include a brief summary of your findings and explain why these findings represent a risk for the company if they continue. So they're looking at future. It's futuristic.
So it wouldn't be. I have a
Then,
question, Ms.
yeah,
Actor. Okay, so if we're talking about if these NEMIS breaches continue to happen and a breach actually occurs and client information is leaked out there, couldn't the client sue them for their data leaking?
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't it be a legal risk to the firm?
Mm-hmm.
So why we
Now you
take legal?
thinking.
That's why I said legal, but you won't take it.
Yeah, but you gotta say why.
Okay, now I say it, so take it to make me feel good.
You happy?
Thank you.
Okay. However, the report should predominantly focus on recommendation for action. So, even though you would have done all that we did, they want the same three parts that I gave you. The evaluation, the recommendation, and the plan of action.
And they want immediate and long term.
So that means that when you have done your risk assessment for each risk you've identified, you have to say what needs to be done immediately, what needs to be done long term. For each one. So they're gonna look for risk, number one, your recommendation, which would be based on your what?
Evaluation.
Evaluation. How you gonna monitor it and review it? Short term, long term. And when you give it, you must give the responsibilities.
So basically, these what our headings need to be looking like.
It's up to you if you're writing with headings or you just letting it flow. You can write it different ways. You can write it by issue,
Because that's what I
or
was
you
thinking, to
you
write it
actually
by
write it
issue.
by report. There are different ways to write it. That's why they start writing it now. They don't wanna read it where, it shouldn't be written where it's disjointed.
Right,
Notice this is one scenario,
right,
so they're looking for a flow.
from top to bottom, so.
Hmm?
What do you mean, why we not okay with? That's the easy way out.
Responsibility?
Going to the board.
The board, the senior management and staff. Who's responsible for what? What?
No, yeah, you can't say why you can't go tables, you laugh, so that's the easy way out. Like say, you're going to the board, they ain't got time to sit down and
Can't
review.
shoot at all.
It depends on how you write it.
Should be a table, come on,
You only want some.
look at that.
Yeah, what you go through all that 20 pages.
Yeah, but you could put your findings in the summary.
Yeah.
You need like a table.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, you know.
But this has to be written out, and this has to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for this to make sense, you should have done your risk assessment. You're the one main start yet? To ensure the risk arising from weaknesses in respect of data protection and confidentiality are addressed both in immediate and longer term. So what that same part is telling you? What I just read, what is that telling you? I need to read it again, but I'm telling you. To ensure, well, it's out of sense. However, the report should predominantly focus on recommendations for action, supported by a plan of action to ensure the risks arising from weaknesses in respect of data protection and confidentiality are addressed both in immediate and longer term. What is that telling you?
They want to address now.
One recommendation for now, fix some of the.
And the regulation and data protection.
So now is more important, basically,
Like, this is top of the
Priority.
right now.
Prioritize. Oh, yeah, from high to low, cause
Yes.
we wanna fix those.
So
at
what's high?
The breaches, damn the breaches.
And you tie these into these.
Tie it into what? We tie with those quickly lines,
Other risks that you have identified.
or besides breach of data and
Because
confidentiality.
they're the ones that are high priority. To them, they have already reached the conclusion that these two represent the highest risk that the company may face if there is a breach. And we know why.
So they pretty much tell you
They're telling you yes.
what to do.
And so if you went and you did your risk and you decided that these ones here are the highest, you're already wrong.
Yeah.
Now look up, okay, you see that immediate, and then the paragraph before says, where is it? Immediate for action. So, your timeline has to demonstrate immediate. What's immediate?
Like tomorrow. Now. I guess it is. It's your turn.
It depends on what you write for your recommendation. Everything cannot be implemented immediately. Some things take steps. Some needs the first part to be done first before the second one kick in, even in a short term. So make sure when you give your time frame, it makes sense. And then what's long term? And if you do it long term, you have to comment on the frequency. So it's a methodical thing, monitoring and review. So we taking everything that we did when we did the risk assessment, and you're pulling it out now. So but you're gonna talk about culture in your recommendation. How you gonna address the culture? You did a chapter on culture already, eh? Okay, so how you gonna address culture?
The board,
The tone from the top, what are they gonna say?
they have to set the mandate.
They have to believe and they have to adopt it and implement it.
So you have to use those words, that you need the board. This is the first step of the board to change the culture of the organization. So when you send out your immediate or your short-term recommendation for implementation, how should it be worded? Should it say the board has mandated? So the examiner knows you're setting the tone from the top. So when you prepare your document has to be clear and succinct to the board. There's no room for doubt. It can't be all muddled up. But see what they say? You schedule a meeting with the board to discuss your findings or recommendations for actions. So that's to be clearly set out. This is the issue, this is what I recommend, this is what should be done immediately, and this is what to be done in the long term. This is the role of the board, this is the role of senior management, this is the role of compliance. That's what they're looking for. Clear, to the point, not all over the place. So if you go, then I take each risk, put it through the process, then you begin to draft your paper.
What she was explaining to you?
No, I tell him I go home and start this tonight with the table. It's real.
Notice that they already have a control measure in place. Second paragraph, you have a breach incident log.
So they are keeping record.
Yes. You need to go and pull out the risk, pull out what are the existing controls. Remember when we did the first chart? And I said, what are the controls currently in place? So you can't give the examiner control that's already in place unless you intend to add something to it. Because otherwise you're not getting no points.
So that also, so they have a risk, you can only say that they have a monitor already, because they have a record.
But where did the breakdown happen? That's what you determine, where is the breakdown? So they do have some controls in place. So when you go through each risk, you have to identify what are the controls that are in place now. We feel good? Yes? So next week I want to look at the papers and then we'll finish chapter 5. And then the following week we're gonna look at the appendices.
You said next week we do
The rest of unit 5. And the following week we'll look at the appendices.
You wait. She wasn't here.
Oh,
So we underpassed last week.
so that's a
And we
different class.
decided.
If she had missed last week, she'd have had this last week, but she would have missed this.
Yeah.
That's true.
No,
No.
I said if we did,
You would have done
we
this
would
last
have done
week,
this last
and
week.
you would have missed
You would
that.
have missed this.
we have a class on the 13th, we decided because Mr. Arthur wasn't there. And
So
she's also-
class is gonna be on the 13th, the last class. Don't come here, don't come here before on phone.
And she wanted
That's number two.
she wanted classes.
Yeah, you said some steps.
Time frame to implement it.
You can understand that?
And being into that, who's responsible for what?
Rules. Okay.
Stop.
Yeah, so we got, like, for this, put some like findings. This is table. Table. It's the, it would be so much enough.
Yeah.
And then it would be paid for the.
And by the time you write down 3 or 4 times, you'll have the next same
But
MGT.
they would allow tables of all my findings and this thing.
We have friends from.
Oh, she was it today. No, see, she died last week. Was all
And you
she
see when you
did.
do the word limit, whether you need to reduce it or take it out.
This thing. What was up on?
No. Good.
Yeah, you sound sick. Okay, the next one is not hard.
What next one? Miss Archer? Why are you doing this? I'm still trying to get over 2. I mean, still even come from 1.
From one.
I swear. When the results come out?
I don't know.
Soon, I believe. She will find.
Well, you know they send them results on Thursday. Always a Thursday. Yeah, it's always a
At
Thursday.
3 o'clock in the
2
morning.
o'clock in the morning.
Take a look at the.
3 o'clock. By 5 for sure, it's there.
You get a notification coming through. I'm like, who notified me? Oh.
No, I be like, who email me? My email ringtone different. So anytime I get an email at 5 o'clock in the morning, I didn't
I
know.
noticed that.
That's that. And I just have to brace myself. As I open and I see like, oh, congratulations, I close back into that.
What's number one, Chair?
Did you see that?
I don't know how to
Compliance
read that.
officer, and how that's evolved over the years.
Oh, okay.
That's the giveaway.
Y'all don't make that, no, don't say, oh, okay. Don't do that.
This one, this is the third pay.
No, don't that, don't think it's that easy now. Y'all know it ain't that easy. Y'all know it ain't that easy, all right, but okay.
There's a multiple questions, she said that's the giveaway. She said that's the giveaway.
What's that?
With the role of the compliance officer. It has multiple parts.
Oh, we gotta choose 1 out of 4? Exactly,
No.
that's the point I'm trying to make, y'all right, but, oh, okay.
There's 4 questions.
What's the second one?
The second one is for you to design a
Design.
risk management process for the
Did
compliance
we just do
function.
this?
So we
For
should
the
be
compliance function.
No,
Compliance function.
Wait,
No.
what?
Compliance function.
no.
Yes. And then the other one?
That plan, not this.
All training. It's just training and the whole human resources function from a compliance and risk perspective.
You wanna no extra copy so we can jot that down next each question?
No, go ahead. Looking at recruitment vetting and training staff, senior staff. And then again, it's on recruitment, demonstrate the role of recruitment vetting and training activities, provide examples of good practice in respect of each of these activities, and make specific recommendations. Huh? What I'm supposed to do? Compliance is responsible for all policies and procedures, enterprise-wide. Every last.
Supposed to be.
It should be. That's what.
How many people you have compliance about?
Why not?
Wow.
Didn't you, when you started, they say, I may ask a stupid question, so let me ask my stupid
And my question is not trying to be so
You
stupid
didn't know
after
though,
all.
you didn't know though.
That was stupid.
So that one isn't too
I find
hard.
that compliance is usually like one of the smallest departments in the company.
Why is it the smallest?
It usually, it tends to be the most, well, isn't it?
But because it's different,
new, okay.
it's not business generated.
Yeah. It tends
The
to be
knowledge for
very-
compliance is in the head of the person. You're not bringing anybody in. That's why your knowledge base has to be so wide. So I separate AML from GRC.
Oh,
And I separate monitoring from both of those.
for what? In a perfect world, but like in practice, like we find in a lot of organizations.
That's because they don't understand.
Compliance is very understaffed.
Because they don't understand. You can explain to
You have
them.
to wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
And so,
But you're already wearing multiple hats without wearing multiple hats because you know so many different
yeah,
disciplines.
yes.
So you can't be doing compliance work,
Right.
AML work, and other
And
people's work.
monitoring
Yeah.
people's work and everything else.
You see what I mean?
But that's what's happening.
But your job description should be focused on what you do and nothing else.
That's right, yeah, well,
Because it's an independent function.
that's right.
Because if it's not, if you can't do your work independently and report to the board on what you see, then you're not doing your job. So if I go to human resources and I look at human resources, what they call it, they have a word for it, a different word, they have a Swiss terminology for it. But it's the guidelines for the board of directors and how they operate. I read it, it wasn't right, and I took my red pen, I circled this, this, and this, and I say, take it to risk, and you'll fix it. That's my job.
You're supposed to fix it.
No,
No,
I'm
she's
fixing it.
supposed to,
I'm
she's
fixing it.
supposed to
Child,
review
you know
it.
that
I reviewed
department
it,
job.
Yes, they compliance.
Oh, so wait,
We
okay,
supposed to
so
find
you
it
just
and fix it.
identify,
No,
yeah.
no,
My
then there's no
department.
independence.
It is. You right.
So you're actually checking yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So it's like.
Then it's worthless.
Check,
Yeah.
check.
It's useless.
You know what I'm saying?
Or
Unless
we
you do-
point it out.
Or unless,
You fix it then.
unless
You
there's
find
like a
that, you
time when
fix
you
it.
have like external auditors who come in and then do the whole.
That's different,
that?
right?
Okay.
We
Yeah,
have that.
Yeah.
It's different though.
Yeah.
Compliance, you're only supposed to check.
only check.
Yeah.
We check.
I just, to
They
make sure
point
that
it out.
they're in compliance.
Oh,
with
we
the
got-
regulation.
we'll fix it there.
If not, tell them.
They don't check.
When
I
do
show
my
you it, now you still
reports,
fix it.
No.
I'm supposed to fix it.
No.
We know that. But that's how it goes.
It's just like when you see a risk, your job is to identify the risk and say whether or not the controls in place to mitigate against those
They
risks.
know that in every company, cause they won't hire nobody to do it.
That's how you carry the function.
That's a good question. You don't wanna hire nobody to do
Do
it.
you feel like your company has sufficient people for compliance work, or needs more?
No, I'm gonna get some more as we venture into other things, because I have different aspects of it.
And you don't need all those stuff. Is this company new?
It's new, old but new. New owners, new strategies, new risk appetite.
So you're the one who set the standards of how you want to compliance work?
And the tone from the top from the board.
So, you don't know someone else.
So you'll hire
We're always there.
I'll always have it. So you go on your website and stuff.
No, you send it in, it depends on what you do at this time. And we try to find the best thing.
No.
And then in here, you get a 50 in the four corners.
Like what
And then the team.
Yeah, that. So you want the time
Yeah.
So why she didn't do this?
When you find out, you let me know, because I have that question every
And I need the evaluated. Okay? You gotta do the last 3 steps to each one of them. Okay, that's it? We good? So this whole exercise is what you do normally if your role is compliance. Not AML, compliance. What you do all day long. And then make recommendations for amendments, policies and procedures. Alright?
Sounds more like Sunday, sexy. I just don't know, just.
You wouldn't know that. They hide things out.
It's a lot of work, be a little bit more into
Okay, let me give you an example.
I don't wanna hold the cost though.
No, I'll give you an example from an AML perspective.
Of course. Oh, I didn't know. See, I used to be in back up. Why?
If you, say you have a client, prospective client, who comes in and they say, I wanna open an account with 2 million. And I expect that over the lifetime of this relationship, I'll bring you 50 million. Yeah, they were a professional driver, Formula One, so they make a lot of money. They decided they're gonna retire, so they have a lot of money. They're in their 20s. They
Let me define
form,
him.
I know.
they form, he forms companies in the free zone. You know what the free zone is?
What's a free trade?
The free trade zone, yeah. You know what that is, right? In Dubai. Open companies in the free trade zone, but you're going to operate your business in high-risk countries in Europe. You're not even born there. So, how did you move from being a retired race car driver to opening up business in that area, in markets that you know nothing about, and to bring that kind of money? Come on, boss. It's a reject. I say no. Not possible.
If he's like the
Makes no
silent-
sense.
the silent partner.
Now, if you said your father was in this business,
And you
your uncle
inherited
was
it.
in this business, you inherited it, you're
I knew
now
you used to be
venturing
in
out
that.
into a new market,
From
Yes.
race car driving.
Or if he's
Yeah.
like a silent partner and
You
then he
start
has a,
from scratch.
yeah, that's
No.
not possible.
okay.
There's no possible to start from scratch
And
and
then-
amass that amount of money. Not possible.
How you get them type of connections?
It's not possible. So that's why I say, when you do the AML is more analytical.
Why he all over?
Hmm?
Like, it's like he
He
trying to
went
not
totally
make
different.
have an audit trail. He trying to chop it
Yes,
up,
chop
so
it
you
up
can't
all of the
detect
place,
it.
exactly. But the answer is no.
Don't bring it up. You don't want the money.
but people will try.
Yes, that commission, this is developing
You
though.
still wanna know where he at though, real person. Where you find him?
You wanna find out?
He in jail. That's how you
Very
say it?
wealthy. He is very wealthy.
I thought we could take some of the video.
But it's things that a lot of people who have changed their profession after being professional, whatever it is, golfer, swimmer, whatever it is, they decide they want to go into business. But
It don't make sense.
it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Or you have someone who marries someone from another jurisdiction. And they marry that person and then they decide that they're gonna go into business in their home country.
His spouse home country.
No, their home country, not the spouse. But you live with the spouse. And then you get your licenses in that country to operate that business in your home country, which is miles away around the globe. Seriously. No. Don't happen. You have to show a connection between you and that business. So you had to be in that business prior to you getting married. Because how you gonna do it? It's not possible. So we good? Everybody happy? Y'all going home and do some work? You get a week, 4 weeks? Okay.
Rest my head today.